Michael Ferguson has handed down his third budget as Tasmanian Treasurer, revealing growing state debt with no expectation of returning to surplus over the next 4 years. The total spend in this year's budget is $9.7 billion. The biggest share goes to health and education. In terms of the budget balance, we'll be in the negative for at least the next 4 years. But once you include government borrowings and take away one-off grants, Tasmania will actually have a deficit of nearly $1.3 billion this financial year, and will still be $288 million in the red in 4 years' time. Net debt is going to be $8.6 billion by the end of the forward estimates. The government says it will introduce modest cuts to the public service to rein in spending, but it's rejected suggestions to introduce new taxes or scrap the proposed Macquarie Point Stadium to bring the budget back into line. State political reporter Lucy MacDonald begins our coverage.
Delivering a difficult set of figures.
I think we'd have to say this has been one of the more challenging budgets to frame.
Well, thanks for being here.
Ballooning debt underlies this year's budget. It'll grow to $8.6 billion in 4 years' time, and the cost of servicing that debt will be $1.2 million per day.
This budget should be rated R for graphic content and horror scenes. There are record deficits and debt. We have an economy that is flatlining.
Our borrowings are about the third lowest in the nation. We believe that our state can afford and can manage within these levels of borrowings.
But things could get worse. GST revenue was $138 million less than expected last financial year and remains a risk to revenue, while the pressure of inflation is forecast to ease. Despite the challenging figures, the government has not held back on spending. There's $5.1 billion for infrastructure, with work on the Bridgewater Bridge continuing and the Midland Highway upgrades nearly complete. Election campaign promises are coming with a $1.3 billion bill. Most of it coming this financial year, like the Burnie Master Plan, which was promised $17 million. There was also cost of living commitments, including electricity bill relief. Almost $650 million has been set aside for child sexual abuse survivors' compensation claims, and another $423 million for implementing the Commission of Inquiry recommendations to improve children's safety. Some new spends have been revealed in the budget. $57 million for Homes Tasmania, $62 million for Events Tasmania, and $36 million to deal with additional demand on the health system. There's nothing in the budget addressing the cost of the Spirit of Tasmania's port upgrades.
We'll make those decisions over the course of the next month, and we will fully inform the Tasmanian people about the way forward for that infrastructure, the arrival of the 2 new ships, and indeed our capacity to pay for that.
In a pre-budget paper, economist Saul Eslake advised the government to introduce new taxes to lift revenue. It's advice the government has not taken on board.
We do respectfully disagree in response to calls for higher taxation.
I would regard this as a triumph of politics over economics.
Mr Eslake says the pandemic is not the reason for the extent of the budget problem.
The reason for the deterioration in Tasmania's public finances is conscious decisions by the government to spend more money, both on services and on capital works.
The government says a surplus is on the horizon, but not until the end of the decade. Lucy MacDonald, ABC News.
The government has acknowledged the state's finances are challenged, but it's decided against introducing new taxes or raising existing ones. Instead, it's relying on a savings measure that critics say will cause devastating cuts to services, salaries and jobs. Jono Gibson explains.
To reduce the strain on the public purse, the government is extending its efficiency dividend. That's a technical term for cost cutting, albeit without extreme austerity measures. In other words, the Treasurer is telling departments to tighten their belts. The government first announced an efficiency dividend last year when departments were told to find 50 cents of savings in every $100 of spendings. In total, the program was designed to save $300 million over 3 years, with health accounting for almost half the savings, followed by the Department of Children and Young People, which includes education, and police, fire and emergency management. But instead of ending in 2026-27, the efficiency dividend will now continue for an extra year, with agencies forced to find a further $150 million in savings. That's raising concerns among unions, the community sector and some political parties.
Hundreds of jobs will go, and that in the coming years, public sector workers who are already behind the mainland can expect lower wages.
People are in the dark. What supports are going to be lost for schools? Which part of the department is going to be axed?
This is putting lives at risk. We have a health crisis going on at the moment, and this government has absolutely failed us.
It is just appalling to see the Liberals' priorities written in black and white on paper. You know, they've got cuts to services, and yet they've got money going into a stadium.
The government says its efficiency dividend will improve productivity while maintaining frontline services. And for every dollar of savings, it's promising an extra $3 in spending.
We believe that the bureaucracy can provide a more efficient public service. But that's not a withdrawal of effort. We're actually supplementing those same departments, in most cases on a 3-to-1 basis.
While the government says its efficiency dividend will help balance the books in the long run, it's also likely to cause ongoing discontent among public servants who say they're already under intense pressure.
Well, as we've just seen, unions, community groups and economists are already lining up to criticise the government's financial choices. State political reporter Lucy MacDonald joins us now. Lucy, how tough is it going to be for the Treasurer to sell this budget?
Well, Guy, it's not likely to be popular. Governments like to deliver flashy budgets with big spending. This one has growing debt with a lengthy and arguably dicey pathway to surplus that's with a fair bit of pain along the way. Now, while there's a fair bit of fun spending in there, of course, we know about most of it because it was announced during the election, so it doesn't do much to take the sting off. To put this in context, Minister Michael Ferguson recently gave up the infrastructure portfolio over the whole Spirit of Tasmania debacle. Now, at the time, there was a lot of commentary around, well, if he's not fit to be infrastructure minister, how is he fit to be treasurer? Now, that rhetoric hasn't really died down, and there's still murmurs of a no confidence motion in his position as treasurer. So this budget is really important for him to sell, both politically and personally. In his speech to Parliament earlier today, it was almost like he was pleading with Tasmanians to just throw him a bit of rope.
Let's not become stuck in the malaise of whinging. For us, on behalf of our community, we can work through our present challenges.
While this budget might seem politically difficult, independent economist Saul Eslake actually says Mr Ferguson's taken the easy road. He says by relying on an efficiency dividend, he's essentially shifted the responsibility onto the department to figure out where those cuts need to be, rather than the government working it out and naming them up. Now, that's something that hasn't impressed the former Lambies turned independents. 2 votes the minority Liberal government very much relies on.
Lucy MacDonald, thank you. The Macquarie Point Stadium project has been listed as one of 10 expenditure risks in this year's state budget. The bulk of the stadium spend, $255 million, will happen in the 2026-27 financial year, before a $200 million spend the following year. It includes a $240 million Commonwealth contribution and $15 million from the AFL. The government will submit the project to the Tasmanian Planning Commission for assessment in the coming weeks, before starting to seek private investment. $355 million of the state's $375 million contribution has been accounted for across the forward estimates to 2028, with Treasury noting that any extra spending after that would need to be funded through short-term loans. Treasurer Michael Ferguson says the stadium's risk status is normal for a project of its size.
Every project, big and small, has risks. You need to manage them. Treasury are not sounding an alarm. They're raising a risk, as they ought to, and as they've done with every other big project we've ever done.